The Subcommittee on Workforce Protections will come to order. I note that a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to call a recess at any time. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on the Department of Labor's proposed overtime rule, including the department's failure to analyze the impact of its proposed rule properly and the costs and burdens that will be imposed by the rule on workers and businesses, especially small businesses. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's hearing. On June 9th, 2016, over 7 years ago, this committee held a hearing titled "The Administration's Overtime Rule and Its Consequences for Workers, Students, Nonprofits, and Small Businesses." Back then, the Obama administration proposed a rule to increase the overtime salary threshold by more than doubling it. Former Chairman John Klein, while recognizing that the overtime threshold should be responsibly reformed, called the administration's drastic move extreme and partisan. Today, we're in much the same place. President Biden has proposed a new, poorly conceived rule to change the overtime requirements, and it couldn't come at a worse time. As businesses and nonprofits work to recover from the pandemic era and still face record-high inflation, the Biden administration wants to implement a new rule that will jeopardize their survival and put workers at risk. What's more, this rule has been issued under the supposed authority of an acting Secretary of Labor, Julie Su, who the United States Senate has declined to confirm for 9 months. Every action of the Labor Department is under a legal cloud as long as this end run around the Constitution continues. Today, I am again calling on President Biden to end the tenure of the now longest-serving acting secretary in United States history. The president must nominate a secretary who will perform his or her duties competently, who will be on the side of American workers, and who can win Senate approval. Only then will the Labor Department be free of the legal uncertainty that currently clouds its important work. This administration's proposed overtime rule poses a threat to the livelihoods of the very people that the administration claims it wants to help. The rule is expected to impact an estimated 3.6 million working Americans and cost employers an estimated $1.3 billion, sticking them between a rock and a hard place. If employers can't afford the new mandate, many will be forced to simply lay off their employees. Employees currently exempt from overtime statuses enjoy greater freedom to pursue professional development opportunities that fit their unique interests and enhance their lifetime earning potential. Nonprofits especially benefit from being able to offer exempted employees flexible work arrangements like telework, which will be less practical if more employees become subject to strict timekeeping requirements. While some employers may choose to increase salaries to surpass the new threshold, these possible benefits to a small percentage of the workforce must be balanced against the many certain harms. Cost hikes at colleges and universities that students will face in the form of higher tuition, the greater administrative costs that will be shouldered by charities, resulting in fewer services to those in need, the diminished efficiency in federal grant research that will affect all taxpayers, and of course, the harm to workers themselves as well as to consumers. The most concerning part about this rule is that it puts the policy on autopilot. Future changes should be subject to the regular policy review, including consultation with stakeholders, rather than a one-size-fits-all formula. Automatic increases are bad policy and bad government practice. Americans are already struggling to recover from the economic challenges imposed by Bidenomics. This new rule is simply unneeded at this time. It was just updated by the last administration. That update, unlike this proposal, only came after a very careful consultation process where the necessary stakeholders were involved. It represented a widely agreed upon consensus, and now the Biden administration is trying to undo the goodwill produced by those conversations and the eventual salary threshold increase of 50%. I urge the DOL to withdraw the proposed rule until it has completed a more thorough consultation with stakeholders. And it must permanently withdraw the provision which would tie the hands of future administrations and Congresses. With that, I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for your testimony today. The investments made by congressional Democrats in the Biden administration spurred the historic economic and wage growth, effectively rebuilding our economy from the bottom up and the middle out. That's not a talking point, that's a fact. The Economic Policy Institute reports that from 2019 to 2022, low-wage workers experienced the fastest real wage growth during a business cycle peak of any time since 1979. And our economy has added more than 14 million jobs since President Biden took office. This historic economic growth was not coincidental. It is a direct result of congressional Democrats and President Biden's policy choices to support workers and businesses. For example, the American Rescue Plan Act passed without a single congressional Republican vote, secured investments that helped vulnerable workers make ends meet and keep them in the workforce. And the Inflation Reduction Act accelerated our economic growth, lowering costs for workers and families, and helping them keep a roof over their heads and food on their tables. Furthermore, President Biden has fully embraced a progressive pro-worker regulatory agenda by raising federal contract workers' pay to $15 an hour and repealing harmful restrictions imposed by the previous administration that allowed unscrupulous employers to misclassify workers and deny them overtime pay, minimum wage, and workers' compensation, just to name a few. Additionally, the Biden administration proposed a rule to raise the overtime threshold for an additional 3.6 million Americans. Moreover, it includes safeguards to automatically and routinely update the threshold so that employees and businesses do not have to wait for future federal updates. These protections are essential for workers who must work long hours to provide for themselves and their families. You know, working hard is not enough if you don't make enough. However, I am concerned that my Republican colleagues are attempting to undermine workers' financial security by limiting their access to overtime pay. Employees should not have to bargain for what they are due by their employers. Your company should pay you for every hour you work, including time and a half. It's that simple. Regrettably, committee Republicans' proposals would instead protect unscrupulous employers at the expense of hardworking Americans' wages and well-being. For example, in the last Congress, committee Republicans reintroduced the Working Families Flexibility Act, which allows private sector employers to compensate hourly workers with comp time instead of overtime pay. In stark contrast, congressional Democrats have reintroduced the Wage Theft Prevention and Wage Recovery Act, which authorizes a civil penalty and increases the maximum penalty for employers who fail to adequately compensate workers for overtime work. Congressional Democrats also reintroduced the Family and Medical Insurance Leave Family Act to ensure that every worker can access paid leave. I would welcome my colleagues' support on these proposals to help improve the lives of workers and their families. And so I want to thank the witnesses again for their time. I look forward to a productive discussion. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all committee members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. after 14 days from the date of this hearing, which is December 13th, 2023. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days after the date of this hearing to allow such statements and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I will now turn to the introduction of our distinguished witnesses. The first witness is the Honorable Paul DeCamp, who is a practicing wage and hour attorney at Epstein, Becker & Green in Washington, D.C. He previously served as administrator of DOL's Wage and Hour Division during the George W. Bush administration. In this role, he was the chief federal officer responsible for interpreting and enforcing the nation's wage and hour laws, including the FLSA. Our second witness is Ms. Shagruti Panwala, who is testifying on behalf of the American Hotel and Lodging Association and is located in New Hope, Pennsylvania. As an owner of multiple hotel franchises, Ms. Panwala has spent many years in various positions from administrator to owner-operator. The third witness is Ms. Judy Conti, who is the Director of Government Affairs of the National Employment Law Project, which is located in Washington, D.C. Ms. Conti previously served as co-founder and executive director of the D.C. Employment Justice Center. And the fourth witness is Dr. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, who is the president of the American Action Forum, which is located in Washington, D.C. Dr. Holtz-Eakin previously served as chief economist of the President's Council of Economic Advisors from 2001 to 2002 and director of the Congressional Budget Office from 2003 to 2005. We thank all of the witnesses for being here today and look forward to your testimony. Pursuant to committee rules, I would ask that you each limit your oral presentation to a 5-minute summary of your written statement. I would like to also remind the witnesses to be aware of their responsibility to provide accurate information to the subcommittee. I will first recognize Mr. DeCamp.
Good morning, Chairman Kiley, Ranking Member Adams, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify at this hearing to address the Department of Labor's proposal to amend the regulations implementing the executive, administrative, and professional exemptions set forth in Section 13A1 of the Fair Labor Standards Act. I'm here today to express my opposition to that proposal, focusing on 4 main points. First, the proposed rule rejects 85 years of Department of Labor practice and would transform the salary threshold into a completely unprecedented regulatory device. Since 1940, the Department's regulations have consistently embodied the principle that the purpose of the salary threshold is to screen out obviously non-exempt employees. Weeding out those individuals avoids the Department, employers, and workers wasting time analyzing job duties of employees whose pay is so low that there is little chance that they would satisfy the duties test for exemption. The Department has repeatedly cautioned that the salary level must not be so high as to exclude a substantial number of workers. Yet the proposed rule acknowledges that it would deny exempt status to at least 3.4 million workers whose duties qualify for exemption today. And the Department admits in a footnote that the real salary threshold it intends to put into the final rule is quite a bit higher than the already high level stated in the proposal. In short, the proposed threshold of more than $55,000 per year would, for the first time in the nearly century-long history of the FLSA, transform the salary threshold into an entirely new regulatory tool, one that operates to deny exempt status to millions of workers whose job duties qualify for exemption. It is not up to the Department to rewrite and to undermine in this manner the law Congress enacted. Second, the proposed salary threshold increase is wildly out of step with prior increases. In the most recent update to the salary threshold, the Department raised the $455 weekly standard established in 2004 to the current level of $684 per week, effective at the start of 2020. Today, less than 4 years later, the Department aims to increase the salary threshold again by just under 55% to $1,059 per week, and perhaps quite a bit more than that. That change would represent roughly an 11.5% average annual rate of increase from the previous change. Looking back at all the salary threshold increases from 1940 to 2020, the average annual rate of change has varied from a low of roughly 2.6% to a high of just under 7%. The proposed rule, however, represents an average annual rate of increase that is between 2 and 3 times the historical norm, and nearly 66% higher than the highest level of annual increase ever seen over the past 80-plus years. Such a dramatic increase is unwise and unnecessary. Third, the proposed rule seeks to implement automatic updates to the salary threshold every 3 years without further formal rulemaking. The Administrative Procedure Act, however, requires agencies to use notice and comment rulemaking when issuing substantive rules. There can be no doubt that changing the salary threshold involves a substantive rule because the Department uses the threshold as part of the legal test for distinguishing exempt workers from the non-exempt. Nothing in the FLSA or the Administrative Procedure Act allows the Department to avoid formal rulemaking for future changes to the salary threshold merely because the Department currently believes that it would like to adhere to the same method for selecting the salary threshold in perpetuity. Finally, if anyone should make the kinds of policy-laden, broadly impactful choices reflected in the proposed rule, it is Congress, not the Department. The FLSA says nothing about a salary requirement for these exemptions. From the very beginning, the Department's approach to both the salary threshold and the job duties requirements for these exemptions has proceeded from a legally invalid premise, that the law supposedly requires narrow interpretation of the exemptions. The Department invoked that principle in its 1940 rulemaking, where it first established a salary requirement and substantially revised its duty standards, and it has done nothing since then to undo the effect of weaving that principle into the entire fabric of the regulations. Yet, more recently, the Supreme Court has made it clear that because the exemptions are just as much a part of the FLSA as the overtime requirement itself, it is legal error to construe exemptions narrowly. In the end, there is no objectively right salary threshold that one can determine through expertise in wage and hour law or experience enforcing the law. as underscored by the present proposal's stated goal of undoing what the department accomplished when it revised these regulations a generation ago. What is really at issue here is nothing more than policy preferences that oscillate from administration to administration. Congress, not the department, should set federal labor policy. This concludes my prepared remarks. I welcome any questions the members of the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I will next recognize Ms. Manwala.
Good morning, Chairman Kiley, Ranking Member Adams, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Jagruti Panwala. My family and I own and operate 8 hotels across the United States. I'm a first-generation American, an entrepreneur, and a franchisee. I was born in Gujarat, India. My family and I immigrated to the United States in 1988 in a search for opportunities for education and entrepreneurship. Very shortly after graduating from college, I decided to take the biggest risk of my life by purchasing a hotel at the age of 22 years old and going into business for myself. Today, we own and operate 8 hotels located in Pennsylvania, Texas, New York, New Jersey, and Ohio. Among these properties, we employ over 200 people and maintain a closely knit relationship with each of them. In addition to running my own family business, I currently serve on the board of directors for American Hotel and Lodging Association. I'm here today to explain my perspective as a small business owner and a hotel operator, and to describe how the Department of Labor's proposed changes to the overtime rule will have devastating effects on my business, my employees, and the lodging industry. It is critical to note that the proposal does not simply increase salaries for few employees at a marginal level. Rather, an up to 70% increase will drastically impact the entire business plan well beyond compensation. We expect not only a significant jump in direct staffing costs, but also substantial increases in associated labor costs, including payroll taxes, federal and state unemployment taxes, insurance, and none of which seems to be included in much of the discussion. In order to handle these increases, employers will be forced to take actions that we do not want to take, including actions that could set workers back in their careers. The last thing small business owner wants to do is to lay off their employees. Unfortunately, some hotels may be forced to do so because of this new rule in order to stay in business. While it is true that some exempt workers may see their salaries increase to the new minimum threshold in order to ensure they remain exempt from overtime pay, many workers will likely be reclassified from salaried to hourly, making them non-exempt, but also constraining their access to benefits, hours, potential flexible work arrangements, and even opportunities for career advancement. As I've shared earlier, I've spent my entire adult life in a hotel business, and I've done every job there is to do, from housekeeping to maintenance to bookkeeping and management. I know firsthand what it takes to advance in a career. The benefits of salaried position afford employees the opportunity to learn aspects of the business beyond their immediate job duties. The department seems to have ignored the fact that different regions of the country have significant variations in the cost of living, and therefore will see significant variations in the impact of the proposed rule on their economy. In 2023, the first-line housekeeping supervisors in New York earned an average annual wage of $62,000, while the same position in Texas saw an average earning of $42,000. Finally, the department's effort to implement automatic updates to the minimum salary threshold will create immense problems for the hoteliers, especially regarding financial projections and their ability to plan for the future. According to the proposed rule, the automatic updates will occur every 3 years, regardless of economic circumstances at the time, which means that the threshold will be updated even there is an economic problem exists. Chairman Kiley, Ranking Member Adams, and the members of the subcommittee, I sincerely thank you for the opportunity to share my story with you today. In the hotel industry, our employees' success is our success, and this misguided rule by the administration will provide less flexibility, and many will be forced to lay off their employees just to stay in the business. This is an outcome no one wants. I strongly urge you to consider the adverse implications of the overtime proposed rule on small business owners and workers when deliberating policy proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I will now recognize Ms. Conti.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Kiley, Ranking Member Adams, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Judy Conti, and I am the Government Affairs Director at the National Employment Law Project, an advocacy organization with the mission to build a just and inclusive economy where all workers have expansive rights and thrive in good jobs. I am grateful for the opportunity to testify, and I will make 3 primary points. 1, DOL's proposed overtime regulation corrects the current overly broad exemptions that end up excluding overtime-eligible workers from the legal protections they should enjoy. 2, employers have ample tools at their disposal to handle the new salary threshold proposed in the regulation. And 3, automatically updating the salary threshold is good for both workers and employers. The FLSA's guarantee of premium pay for overtime hours was meant to discourage dangerous overwork of employees and to encourage employers to spread out work to more people, thereby creating jobs. The executive, administrative, and professional employee exemptions are meant to be limited to workers who both earn salaries and have job duties that truly set them apart from those entitled to overtime pay. Unfortunately, because of decades of administrative neglect and flawed rulemaking processes, the current salary threshold is so low and the duties test made so weak and opaque by the 2004 revisions that it allows employers to easily misclassify millions of workers each year, giving them titles that sound like they should be exempt even when the vast majority of their job duties are clearly non-exempt. Because the duties test is so opaque, workers by and large don't know any better and end up deprived of wages they have earned and should be paid. In January this year, the National Bureau of Economic Research released a report documenting that in 2019 alone, employers avoided paying about $4 billion in overtime that workers earned with these phony job titles. Clearly, this is a problem that DOL needs to mitigate, and given the scope and consequences of the misclassification, and the sheer impossibility of wage and hour enforcement adequately solving the problem, it must be done through regulation. By raising the salary threshold to $55,068 per year, DOL will provide new and enhanced protections for approximately 3.6 million people who are now working more than 40 hours per week for free. By historical standards, this is actually a rather modest threshold. In 1975, 63% of full-time salaried workers were covered by overtime protections, regardless of their duties. Today, that share is a mere 9%. Had the relevant 1974 salary threshold for the current duties test merely been updated for inflation, it would stand at nearly $68,000 per year. And make no mistake about it, excessive overtime is dangerous for workers, leading to cardiovascular disease, stress, depression, increased alcohol and tobacco use, and mental health issues. It can also lead to increased absenteeism, low productivity, low morale, and higher turnover, all of which are significant costs to employers and make their workplaces less attractive to their current workforce for potential job candidates. Employers have many tools available to manage the new overtime obligations. They can raise salaries over the new threshold, decide to pay overtime, reassess workloads, better manage their workers' time, hire additional staff, or give more hours to part-time workers, fostering both healthier work-life balance and an environment where employees are compensated with fair pay and better working conditions that will result in higher productivity and less turnover. And to be clear, while the significance of this new regulation will be profound on the affected employees, the overall impact on employers is quite small, especially because the threshold is pegged to the lowest wage region in the country. According to the Economic Policy Institute, the new threshold will account for a mere 0.023% of the total wage bill employers paid in 2022. Of course, these costs are aggregate to employers as a whole, and circumstances do vary by individual employers. But there are many voices of small businesses in the administrative record, including Mitch Kahn of Unionware in Newark, New Jersey, Rebecca Hamilton of W.S. Badger Company, and Brian England, owner of BA Auto Care in Columbia, Maryland, who enthusiastically support this new regulation and write compellingly about how good overtime policies are good for their business and their bottom line. Finally, the proposal to update the threshold is beneficial for both workers and employers. It will ensure that overtime worker protections don't erode for workers, And employers will benefit from regular, predictable increases that are pegged to the economic circumstances of the times, and they can plan for them and implement them. Thank you for your time and attention today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I will next recognize Dr. Holtz-Eakin.
Thank you, Chairman Kiley, Ranking Member Adams, members of the committee for the privilege of being here today to discuss the proposed rule that would raise the threshold for the salary test from roughly $36,000 to $55,000 and indexes to automatically rise further thereafter. I want to make 3 points about the proposed rule. First, based on sort of traditional criteria, there is no compelling case for raising the threshold at this time. And instead, the rule is advertised as an attempt for distributional policy and to compensate low-wage workers. Interpreted from that perspective, it's a really poorly targeted redistributional policy. $55,000 is only $2,000 below the median of the wage distribution. So these are hardly the lower tail of the wage distribution. These are, in many cases, very highly compensated people. Our estimates done using the 2022 Survey of Income and Program Participation say there'd be about 3.1 million workers affected. Only 2.4% of them live in families in poverty, and fully 45% of them are 3 times the poverty line. This is hardly the kind of a distributional policy that most people would endorse. But the biggest point is that we estimate that about $20 billion worth of additional wages and salaries would have to be paid to compensate for the overtime. And simply passing a rule doesn't create the economic resources to pay those wages. They have to come from somewhere. And so firms could be imagined to react in a variety of ways. They could not hire people, in which case we would essentially redistribute this income from people without a job to people with a job, which is a perverse form of redistribution at best. It could come at the expense of raises for those people who are retaining their job but don't work any overtime. And they could be very low-wage non-overtime workers. So again, the redistribution would be perverse and within the firms. It could come at the expense of additional investment by these firms. They could not upgrade their capital stock. They could not adopt new technologies. In the long run, this has a predictable consequence. Productivity will be lower. The wages paid to all workers in those firms will be lower. And again, the consequence is not to make workers better off, but ultimately to harm them. And certainly an initial impact might be that firms would try to pass along these additional costs in the form of higher prices. As the committee is well aware, the preeminent economic challenge of this era has been 40-year highs in inflation. Adding additional cost pressures to firms at this time is an unwise course for policy. So it's hard to defend this particular proposal, and the economic fallout is by and large going to be negative for the U.S. economy. So I thank you for the chance to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Under Committee Rule 9, we will now question witnesses under the 5-minute rule. The representative from Missouri, Mr. Burleson, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DeCamp, the overtime proposed rule is deeply concerning for the well-being of our nation's small businesses and all other employers, even universities. The Department of Labor's approach has raised serious issues, particularly regarding the insufficient comment period and the lack of consideration for the challenges that it's going to be to the businesses that are impacted. So the rush to push through this rule without reasonable and meaningful comment period is a disservice to both employers and workers because a 60-day window is insufficient. In your experience, have you ever seen such a short comment period for a policy of this magnitude?
Not of this magnitude. We've seen other lesser impactful rules that have 60-day comment periods, but typically when the department engages in major rulemaking with broad economic impacts throughout the economy, it tends to honor requests for extensions of the comment period.
So, and why do you think that they've had such a short comment period? Why are they trying to rush this through?
You'd have to ask them. They want to move quickly.
In addition, it's important that we recognize that we've been here before. The past administration, the Obama administration, issued a similar change, and it faced legal challenges. I think it was determined to be arbitrary and capricious. What do you foresee? What legal challenges do you foresee with this rule?
Essentially the same challenge, coupled with the argument that the proposed rule is contrary to the FLSA. The ruling out of the District Court of Texas, which remains on the books, was that the department's decision in 2016 to raise the salary threshold so substantially that it would exclude millions of people, at the time I think that one was 3.6 million people, from exempt status, based solely on their compensation and without regard to their job duties, was inconsistent with the FLSA. It was arbitrary and capricious and not what Congress intended. I think we would see a similar challenge to this proposal if it were to become a final rule, because again, we'd have a very large number of individuals denied exempt status without regard to their job duties, based solely on their compensation. And I think we would see a similar challenge now.
Thank you. Ms. Panwala, this proposed rule that we're discussing, as you have said in your testimony, fails not only to address the need for modernization, but also poses a significant burden on businesses like yours. As a hotel owner and operator, how do you anticipate that this rule will affect your business and the rules that you have with your employees?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you just mentioned the 60-day implementation. Look, I'm a business owner, and I'm busy doing day-to-day, the hotel operations, but not many business owners or not many hotel owners will even understand or will have enough time to understand what these rules means to their business. There's financial projections, and I think we all can also agree that running a business now than versus 10, 15 years ago, it has changed completely. There's a lot of higher cost on a fixed cost involved. And when we are implementing a rule with this just a 60-day implementation, the business owners will have to make a lot of changes very quickly. And one of the changes will be that the employees that they have for 10, 15 years, who are on salary employees, who feel like they are part of the business, they're part of the winning team working together, will have to be moved to salary. And that's, in my opinion, demoralization for our employees. And I don't think as a business owner, I want to take that step. And I don't think my employees would be happy with that action either. So it's a lose-lose situation on both sides when it comes to the employers and employee.
Yeah, I didn't even think of this question, but as you're talking this through, I'm thinking of my previous career, and most of my career I worked as an IT professional, and a lot of my salary probably would have fallen under this new rule, and I would have seen it as a demotion. I know that people may not understand that, but I would have seen it as a demotion because I enjoyed, as a salary employee, not having to clock in and clock out, right? Not having to have every minute of my day tracked. Because I think that at the end of the day, the employer and I had a relationship that you do the work, you get paid, regardless of how much time that you're here. And so if you can...
Yeah, I'd like to just add one more thing. We're not looking over the shoulders for most of our team members, and I call them team members when I'm with them instead of our employees, because they are part of the team. We're not looking at, okay, what time you're coming in, what time you're leaving. I'll give you a perfect example. This morning, when I was up, 6 in the morning, I received a text from one of my employees, and I have the text saying, hey, I need to leave 1 o'clock today. Is it okay? Because she's changing her apartment from one apartment to another location, and they have people helping today. Now, this was not something that was expected. It was a last-minute thing. So the stuff like this happens, and I want to say not like once in a while. I would say weekly basis. If somebody's, has to go to doctors or so they have to pick up their child. There's so many examples that I can give you that us as a business owners, but because our relationship with our employees is so close, that they also know that Jagrati is never going to say no, because she knows that how important the family and your medical situations are. So I think a lot of this relationship would change, and I think that would be a devastating, especially for me as a business owner, to see my employees in that position and to see my business in that position as well.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
The ranking member, Dr. Adams, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, I want to thank the witnesses. I will say it again, working hard is not enough if you don't make enough. I want to direct my question to Ms. Conti. First of all, let me just say I'm concerned with how we can not just protect workers' paychecks, but also protect their time so that people can earn a meaningful income and have the time to enjoy it. The overtime threshold has been allowed to stay flat for long periods of time. In fact, at one point, it had stayed the same for 29 years. If the overtime threshold is set at a flat, unchanging amount, what does that mean for workers' pay and for workers' time?
Right. Well, actually, ma'am, if the overtime threshold is set at what seems like a static amount, it actually is a changing amount, because every year it erodes and it means less in terms of absolute dollars. So whether we index for inflation, which just keeps the status quo, or we set a number that erodes every year, it is a number that continues to change in effect and in reality every year. It's detrimental to workers. I mean, we saw that period from 1975 to 2004 when there was no change of a threshold. The Trump administration signaled that it planned to revisit the threshold every 3 years, acknowledging that that is a best practice. But of course, we haven't been able to revisit it that quickly again. The administrative process is, by definition, time-consuming, expensive. It's fabulous government practice to do something that is efficient, that keeps things steady for workers, and again, keeps things steady for employers. I've been doing this work for 30 plus years, and I've testified at a number of these hearings before, and what I always hear from my colleagues in the business community is they want to be able to plan. They want predictability, and they want bright line rules. Well, this rule gives them a bright line threshold and the predictability that every 3 years there will be modest increases that just keep pace with costs. And if we're in a recessionary period, in fact, there would probably be no increase, or there might be a decrease, in fact, in the threshold.
So thank you. So let me ask you, let me say that the venture capitalist and entrepreneur Nick Hanauer writes that the low overtime threshold has enabled some employers to reduce jobs, such as by converting 3 40-hour work week jobs into 2 60-hour work week jobs, and to pocket the 40 hours in lost wages. So do you agree? And what would the Biden administration's proposal overtime rule mean for jobs?
I absolutely agree. That's what's happening, and the National Bureau of Economic Research confirmed that in its groundbreaking study this year. We see lawsuits and media accounts all the time, in particular in retail and in hospitality, and I'm certainly not saying this about my distinguished colleague here, but and in the restaurant industry, that people are routinely working 50, 60, sometimes more hours per week with phony job titles, if you will, and they're not only not getting paid overtime for those hours, they're not getting paid anything at all extra for those hours.
Okay.
And then they're losing time with their families and in their personal lives as well.
Okay, let me ask about other policies that could protect workers' time and ability to balance work and life. For example, who in our economy is working variable hours each week? And what do we know about the importance of predictable scheduling on workers' mental health?
Yeah, by and large, it is low-wage workers who are subject to what we call just-in-time scheduling, where they don't have enough advance notice to plan adequately for childcare, transportation, other aspects of their life, including things like going to take care of their health. They can often report for work and not have enough work to do, and then are sent home, so they don't earn the full wage that they expect to that day, even if they've already brought their child to daycare and paid for a whole day. So this just-in-time and unpredictable scheduling really wreaks havoc, not just on the temporal lives of workers, but it really impacts their ability to build a steady work history, to have predictable incomes, to build a security as they go along. So that is why we support the Schedules That Work Act, which would give workers a substantial advance notice about their schedules. When they show up, they get an adequate wage, an adequate number of hours, and they're able to plan the rest of their lives.
Well, thank you very much. You've answered the questions before I asked. I appreciate it very much, and thank you for your testimony. I yield back, Mr.
You're
Chairman.
welcome, ma'am.
The representative from Illinois, Ms. Miller, is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Kiley. Over the past 2 years, we've seen record high inflation, supply chain issues, and workforce shortages. In addition, hundreds of harmful new federal regulations issued under the Biden administration. This proposal by the Biden Department of Labor will create yet another burden for small businesses struggling to survive in the Biden economy. In my district, I hear countless sad stories from employers about the difficulty in finding employees. The Biden administration is putting 3.6 million American jobs at risk with this proposed rule, which will only add to the current workforce shortage. Ms. Panwala, if this rule goes into effect, would the hotel industry be forced to fire or lay off some of their employees?
Thank you both. Unfortunately, that would be the scenario. The hotels run on a very, very, very tight margin. And I think one of the aspects that also has changed now is the borrowing money, right? When we have to renovate the property or anything to do with the property, the rates have increased. Just give you a quick example, 2 of our properties out of 8 properties went through the refinancing, and where we were paying the lower rate, now it's double the rate. So our debt pretty much double what we were paying. So in this time of period where we're struggling as a business owners to just keeping everything steady, just to make sure that even we can keep our business open, because at the end of the day, we're successful when our employees are successful, vice versa. So I think it's really, really important that not losing flexibility, making sure that we're keeping our employees, we're making sure that they have a consistent paycheck and they have a stability, because that's one of the major things the employees look for, is the stability, consistency, and also flexibility. And I've said that example to you, which I have thousands of examples. I think that really keeps the employee morale up, and I feel like it keeps the economy going because the businesses are running and the economy is also running.
Well, in light of talking about flexibility, what challenges would this cookie cutter nature of this rule create for hotels and other businesses that are operating in multiple states?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if you have somebody who's just coming in at 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock and who is a manager position, when there's a time of crisis, if somebody's checking in late, if there's a computer issue, there's nobody there to take care of the customers or the hotel, and that creates a challenge. Like I said, the flexibility is one thing, but also on an operations side, it would create a major issue because now we have to really look over the shoulders of our managers at the property, saying, okay, did you get this done? What time did you come in? Right now, when they're on a salary, they feel like they are a part of the business. They're coming in, not just doing ABC, but learning even more aspects of it. As I stated in my testimony, they're learning and broadening their horizon on some of the other things that, for the hotel. So I think the operations would be very tight, and also to figure out how, if this rule is implemented, how do you have the financial projections for the business, right? How do you make sure that you're still able to pay your mortgage, you're still able to pay your electricity, you're still able to making sure paying your employees? It would just be devastating, in my opinion, to the hotel business.
But specifically, if a business owner had operations in multiple states, how would this rule impact them?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, that's the one thing. It's a regional difference, right? The cost of living is different. So we have a hotel in Ohio and we have a hotel in New York. The cost of living is very different, as we all know. Even running a property is very different. When the property that we purchased in Ohio versus in New York has a complete different parameters. So keeping everything, putting everything, and saying that one size fits all approach, it doesn't really work.
Absolutely. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today, and I yield my remaining time to Chairman Kiley.
Thank you. The representative from Michigan, Ms. Stevens, is recognized.
Thank you. How much time do Americans spend working, and how much are they compensated for it? Dr. Holtz-Eakin, you were citing some of the facts surrounding overtime in your testimony, referencing Depression-era standards. When was the Great Depression? Wasn't that almost 100 years ago?
The depths of the Great Depression were in 1932.
Right. And are you aware, sir, of the average cost of a home in the United States of America?
There are estimates of the median house prices every month.
Right. And are we aware of what economists are saying now that an American worker needs to make for the median price of a home today to qualify? It's $100,000, sir. So, look, I think that we are reckoning with a reality here on this committee and in this country in terms of not raising the minimum wage for as long as we have refused to raise it. Obviously, salary and what people bring home is oftentimes deeply personal. My colleague, the ranking member of this subcommittee, talked about daycare. And certainly you can drop your kid off at daycare and then commute. And, you know, Dr. Holtz-Eakin, I'm not sure if you're aware of the average commute time of Americans.
I'm not.
Yeah, it's 330 hours a year. So people spend upwards of 2 weeks, American workers spend upwards of 2 full weeks commuting. And they're not compensated for that, right? They're paying for it. They're paying energy costs. They're paying for daycare. Their clock doesn't start when they begin their commute. And so as we start thinking about worker fairness, and obviously as Democrats on this committee were, you know, delighted about the 40-hour work week and what that meant historically, and certainly I believe that the 40-hour work week came about when we primarily had single earning households. Now we have dual income earning households, raising children, getting them to school, checking through doctor's appointments. I come from Michigan, where we just had an incredible victory for the American worker led by the UAW, talking about worker wages and increasing wages. And we're so proud of a 21st century labor movement that hails from the American auto industry, led by the UAW, and our manufacturing base. I think that it is incumbent on us here on this committee, and as true partners with the Biden administration on the Democratic side for the American worker, to think about what this means to increase the wage, the qualifying wage for overtime. Because who else is going to pay it? You know, we have colleagues on the other side of the aisle who voted for, you know, a tax scam bill. Certainly didn't help the middle-class worker. You know, we're coming out of a pandemic. We've got global wars. We've got rising costs. We've got an energy challenge. You know, I certainly want to thank Ms. Conti for her contributions to today's hearing. And I'd like to take a minute to ask you about how we, you know, expand long hours at work and how that's hurting working families and the additional responsibilities they bear. According to a 2019 Gallup poll, 52% of full-time workers reported working over 40 hours a week.
Mm-hmm. And we see that workers are increasingly willing to, especially younger workers, are willing to leave jobs where they have to do mandatory overtime, especially if it's uncompensated. They're willing to strike over it, like the Frito-Lay workers did over all of the forced overtime that they had to do. You know, we're also reckoning with a generational shift where younger workers don't feel the same need to pay their dues, so to speak, that people in my generation did, for example. And employers have to be responsive to that as well. Part of the workplace shortages we're seeing right now is not because there aren't workers, but there aren't workers that want to work for the jobs and the conditions and the pay that currently exist.
And as a daughter of small business owners, I grew up in that environment. I saw it and, certainly appreciate our small business owner testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
The chair of the full committee, Dr. Fox, is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Kiley. I appreciate, and I thank our witnesses for being here today. It's an important issue, and I'm very grateful for this. I will make one just brief comment before I ask my question, is that unfortunately, what Ms. Conti was talking about is there's just a lot of people in this country who don't want to work, period, and want somebody else to take care of them. And that's not what this country's all about. What we need, we have great opportunities in this country for people to be successful if they want to work hard. Ms. Panwala, being considered an exempt employee has benefits for both the employer and employee. As noted in your written testimony and in your comments, for many, the flexibility of being a salaried employee allows them to grow within the organization. And as you said earlier to Ms. Miller, to feel a part of the organization. What else can you tell us about how your employees value their exempt status that you might not have said to Ms. Miller?
I think, thank you, Chairwoman. And I'll go back to, what you just said. When I started in 1991 in the hotel business, actually 2001, I'll correct that. When I started in the hotel business, I did everything. I did the housekeeping, I did the front desk, I did the maintenance, I cleaned the toilets, I did everything that I needed to do. And even during pandemic, to your point, when we had a huge labor shortage, nobody wanted to work, I was doing that. I was doing that with my kids. My daughter's 19-year-old. I was doing that with my husband. So I think the flexibility is a huge part of it for our employees, because as I mentioned earlier to Congressman Miller, that it is not a once in a while kind of situation. It's pretty much almost a weekly basis with the different employees. So that's definitely one of it. But I also think that the relationship and demoralization of the employees is also, because once, if I'm on a salary for 5 to 10 years with my employer and all of a sudden I'm on hourly because of this new rule implementation, how would I pay my bills on a consistent basis? We have hotels, a couple of hotels in New Jersey in Ocean City, and during the summer we have more occupancy. In winter, we have a very small occupancy. We barely have 10, 15 rooms per day. But our salaried employees are salaried throughout the years because they're getting the consistent paycheck throughout the years. They're not worried that, oh, now in wintertime I have to find another job or fill my hours. So I think that there's a lot of things, but my concern is not just the financial burden, which is a huge concern, the implementation, and also how would the relationship turn out between the employer and employees that we've had such a...
Thank you very much. Mr. DeCamp, we've heard from countless industries and individuals that this rule is bad for exempt employees. Based on your experience with wage and hour division regulations, what will be the effect of raising the overtime salary threshold on currently exempt employees who will need to be reclassified?
The main issue that happens when you get reclassified from exempt to non-exempt is that you go from the security of a week in, week out salary or a bi-monthly salary, it's regular, you can pay your bills, to a great level of insecurity of knowing that your income depends on the vicissitudes of the workflow. It's also seen, and it's been said by other witnesses, it's a huge demotion morally. When you're thinking about it, you lose the opportunity to participate in the higher level of benefits that are typically available for exempt employees. You lose flexibility in your working arrangement. And the employer now doesn't have the ability to offer the same kind of training and developmental opportunities to you, because now that comes at a marginal cost per dollar.
Right. Why did the Department of Labor originally implement an overtime salary threshold?
The purpose was very simple. The purpose was to weed out those individuals who merely had a title of manager or supervisor but weren't really doing manager supervisor work. The notion of the bona fide executive, administrative, or professional employee really focuses on people who are doing the real work that those exemptions were meant to cover. The salary threshold was meant to essentially weed out people whose pay was so low that there was very little chance, very little likelihood that they would actually be exempt under the duties test. It was never meant to do anything more than that. It was never meant to weed out people who are actually performing exempt qualifying duties who are bona fide executive, administrative, or professional.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I would like to focus my questioning on weighing the costs versus the benefits of this policy to workers themselves. And Ms. Penwalla, I think you did an excellent job of laying out a lot of the cost to workers, and so I want to ask you some more questions about that. But first, let's actually look at the purported benefits, because I do think it's probably true that there are some folks out there who are falling through the cracks of the existing regulatory scheme and probably do deserve overtime and aren't getting it right now. But as we just heard from Mr. DeCamp, the lever that is being pulled in an unprecedented way, in a very aggressive way, with this particular regulation or proposed rule is not the appropriate one to hone in on those folks who really are falling through the cracks. And what's more, we heard from Dr. Holtz-Eakin that the folks who will benefit aren't necessarily the ones who really need the help the most. And so I think that was a really important point that you made, and so I just want to give you a chance to repeat it when you said that this would only benefit 2.4% of the people who would benefit are living in poverty. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so what was your broader point there about the distributional effects of this policy?
Well, as my colleague said, this was intended as a backstop to catch people who were misclassified, and this aggressive raising of the threshold appears to be not driven by those considerations, but instead by just an attempt to redistribute wages toward lower wage individuals. Viewed from that perspective, it's a really poorly targeted policy. It does not help those who are living in poverty. Nearly 50% of it goes to families who are at 3 times the poverty level, and it comes with a set of costs that we're going to distribute to some people, but it has to come from somewhere.
That's
and
right.
In many cases, the implied redistribution is very perverse. It's from people who don't get a job to people who have a job. You never want to do that.
Right. So the benefits are fairly poorly targeted and certainly not overwhelming for all that many folks who really need help. So let's, as a policymaker, again, those are the benefits. Now let's weigh those against the costs. So Ms. Panwala, you told us a little bit about your personal story. You immigrated from India and came to the United States in search of opportunities for education and entrepreneurship, bought your first hotel at age 22. You now own 8 hotels, employ 200 people. Would you say you're an example of the American dream?
100%, yeah. I would say that there's just not me. There's many immigrants who, work really, really hard. And I know one of our congresswomen mentioned that she grew up and a small business owner. So she would understand that, it's as an immigrant, when you come with nothing, you're basically doing everything, right? And I started in this industry in the same exact way. I started my job as a housekeeper.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing housekeeping. I was doing everything I needed to do. So I think, I would agree that that's really.
And you said something that I found very interesting. You said the single most important aspect of our business is our employees. What do you mean by that? You want to give them the chance at the American dream as well, right?
I've always believed in, and I think many business owners will look at that it's a team effort at a business, right? When you're running a business, you want to make sure that everybody is a part of not just the decision-making process, but they feel like they're part of that organization. And that's how I view our employees as part of our team.
Yeah.
And when you're with them for so many years, you want to make sure that you're taking care of them, which we are. We're always
Right.
taking care of employees by providing flexibility, proper pay. But if the government gets involved, which it seems like it is, and and starts doing start putting out the regulations, that hurts the relationship between employers and employees.
That's a
so
great
if nothing
point.
is broken, well, what are we trying to fix? In my opinion, at least for my business perspective.
It
that I can
interferes
say
with the
that.
relationship, right? And you, in fact, made a point here that hotels operate on very tight margins. Shocks to your businesses handed down by the government with nearly no time to adjust could be the difference between staying open and closing doors. So do you think hotels will shut down if this goes into effect?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And then what happens to the workers?
They don't have a job.
They don't have a job.
They don't have a job, right? So if like I said, our success is our employees' success, our employees' success is our success. So if we're not successful, if we're not able to keep our lights on and keep the doors open and keep the business running, then these 200 employees or majority employees would be out of the job, and they would have to go somewhere else, look for different positions.
And then even those who are able to stay open, do you think they might have to lay off workers if this rule goes into effect?
Yes, because obviously, there's a tight budget of running a property, and as I mentioned, especially now, because of so much fixed costs are going up, and because of the lending part of it. Like, so when I mentioned the refinancing of the property, when you have a property that we're paying 5.5%, all of a sudden that interest rate goes to 10.5%, your debt now doubles on a monthly basis. So those projections, we know as owners, how to handle those. But then on top of that, if you're putting regulations such as overtime rule, it would be just very difficult. So if even the business still stays open, we would have to move some of the salaried employees to hourly employees to make sure that we're managing the budget.
Thank you. My time has expired. I now recognize the representative from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg.
I thank the chairman, and thanks to the witnesses for being here today. During the 114th Congress, as I had the privilege to chair this subcommittee, and along with over 200 of our fellow House members, I introduced the Protecting Workplace Advancement and Opportunity Act, which would have prevented the Obama DOL from implementing the flawed 2016 version of the overtime rule. Thankfully, seldom do I say that about the courts, but thankfully, that rule was invalidated by the court. However, the Biden administration has now sought, as we are discussing today, to resurrect a similarly flawed approach. Just 4 years ago, the Trump DOL raised the overtime limit over 50% to its current $35,568 level in a widely supported compromise. Now I understand the importance of returning to more regular adjustments in the salary threshold. However, I'm concerned that raising the threshold an additional 55% in such a short time frame will impose significant burdens on businesses and limit opportunities for workers, as has been clearly brought out today. Dr. Holtz-Eakin, as succinctly as possible, from a guy who has written widely on this, and maybe could write another book on it as well, what economic difficulties are likely to surface should the proposed overtime rule go into effect just 4 years after the previous rule? And I say succinctly because simple sometimes catches our attention more, especially those who will be reading the documents.
So there are two kinds of costs imposed by the rule. The first is the administrative implementation of the rule, the burden imposed on businesses to comply. That's the $1 billion or so that we've seen in most of the 16, 19, and this proposed rule. That's not to be ignored. This administration has finalized 750 rules in its time in office, and they have imposed a $437 billion cost on the U.S. economy. That's a record pace of burdens on the private sector to comply with rulemaking. So this would be yet another burden of that type. The second costs are those of the economic adjustments to accommodate the additional wages and salaries that must be paid, either by raising salaries to keep people exempt or by paying the overtime itself. And that's very simply not captured in the regulatory analysis because it's viewed as a transfer in the private sector. That transfer has real consequences. Some people will not get a raise because you have to pay someone else more. That comes at their expense. Some businesses won't be able to modernize, they won't be able to expand. That'll come at the expense ultimately of the workers' productivity and their ability to raise their wages. Some businesses will try to pass this along as additional price increases at a time when that's the number one economic problem. That'll hurt consumers broadly. And so this is not a costless move in any way. It has administrative costs and has deep economic consequences.
Yeah. And it adds to the pain of Bidenomics significantly more. Thank you. Mr. DeCamp, in your written testimony, you note that the proposed salary threshold is historically excessive. Could you discuss the history of these adjustments in more detail?
Sure. When we look at the adjustments that have happened over the years, it's sometimes difficult on an apples-to-apples basis to compare them because we see increases that happen over different increments of time. So, and sometimes they raise it after 4 years, sometimes they raise it after 29 years. So in my testimony, I've tried to level for that by looking at the average rate of increase between different changes to the regulations. What we see is that historically, before this proposal, the average annual rate of increase over the past 80-something years varied between about 2.6% per year and a high of 6.97% per year. This proposal would increase 11.55% or more per year. I say or more because the actual number that the department will use will probably be higher than the figure represented in the proposed rule. So this proposed increase is, again, 2 to 3 times the historical average annual rate of increase, and it's about 2/3 higher than even the highest increase the department has ever adopted at any point in the last 85 years.
Amazing. The impact that could be, primarily for political purposes, and hurting the people allegedly that the administration says they want to help. Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
Without objection, I enter into the record letters of support from the Associated Builders and Contractors, the Credit Union National Association, Independent Electrical Contractors, the Independent Women's Forum, the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors, the American First Policy Institute, the Partnership to Protect Workplace Opportunity, the American Society of Travel Advisors, College and University Professional Association for Human Resources, and the National Retail Federation. I would like to thank our witnesses again for taking the time to join us today, and I now recognize the ranking member for a closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for your testimonies today. Today's hearing has underscored why President Biden's proposed rule to raise the overtime threshold is critical for American workers, businesses, and the economy. Every day, millions of hardworking Americans work long and strenuous hours without adequate pay to provide for themselves and their families. We'll say it again, working hard is not enough if you don't make enough. Adding insult to injury, many workers push 50 to 60-hour work weeks without fair pay or adequate overtime pay protections. These unscrupulous practices encroach on workers' rights, and they hinder their ability to have a work-life balance where they can spend quality time with their family, get adequate rest, and work a full-time job, a basic promise of work that workers organized for decades to secure. That is just not right. Employees must be paid for every hour they work, including time and a half. Now is not the time to shortchange America's workers. Republicans should join Democrats in supporting overtime pay protections and building upon President Biden's work to build our economy from the bottom up and the middle out. Thank you very much for your testimony, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, and I want to again thank all of our witnesses today. You know, this is a subcommittee on workforce protections, and unfortunately, again and again, we've seen from this administration attacks on American workers, a anti-worker agenda that is truly a central feature of what has become known as Bidenomics. We've seen it, for example, with the attacks on independent contractors, with potentially millions of workers losing their livelihoods with a new rule that is being proposed by this administration. And so when you see a rule like the one that we've considered today that says we're going to deny by fiat millions of workers their exempt status, their ability to work under conditions that they have chosen, that's something that I think ought to raise serious alarms for everyone on this committee, on both sides of the dais, because that is our charge. We are the subcommittee on workforce protections, and here you have an administration that is looking to strip rights away from millions of workers. But they argue that nevertheless, eroding the rights of workers is justified in this case because of benefits that might follow in a material sense. But I think the testimony we've heard today has thoroughly debunked that argument when you weigh the costs versus the benefits. We've seen that the benefits are actually quite narrow and not really targeted to the folks who really need help, whereas the costs are sweeping for workers themselves. First of all, we're going to see if this rule goes into effect, many businesses will be forced to shut down and all of their workers will lose their jobs. Other businesses will be forced to lay people off because they simply cannot afford the additional costs that this rule would pass on to them. So those workers will lose their jobs as well. You have some workers who are in seasonal industries. The hotel industry is one of them, who now are not going to be able to get the sort of hours they need when they need it, and are going to face unpredictable work schedules, whereas if they're salaried, then they have a predictable paycheck that's coming each month. Those folks are going to suffer. You have people who want to be salaried employees, who get workplace flexibility, who can telework, who get better benefits in those sort of situations, who have opportunities for career advancement, who can learn other facets of the business in order to promote their career and to enhance their lifetime earning. All of those opportunities are going to be taken away from potentially millions of workers by this proposed regulation. So those are all of the costs. That's the basic balance of the sort of fairly minimal benefits to workers and the sweeping costs to workers, not to mention the other costs associated with this policy, raising costs for consumers at a time when inflation has already made life so difficult for so many families, making it more difficult for nonprofits to operate and to serve vulnerable populations, raising administrative costs at universities to make tuition even higher for consumers. And so when you look at the erosion of rights and the very significant costs of this policy, it really isn't even a close call from a policymaking perspective, which is why perhaps the administration is trying to take this out of the hands of policymakers by really imposing a policy that in the first instance is more properly crafted by Congress, but perversely is saying we're now going to lock this policy in and have a stipulated increase every 3 years without Congress having an opportunity to participate, without even having a new process under the Administrative Procedures Act at the agencies level, without having stakeholders have the opportunity to participate in that process. And it's going to happen, by the way, regardless of the state of the economy, regardless of the unique circumstances that may counsel for or against a change at any given time. So it's really a perfect example of why Americans across the board, across party lines, overwhelmingly say that we are on the wrong tracks when it comes to the economy, that Bidenomics has been a failure for the economy and it's been a failure for workers. And I will tell you in closing that as someone who comes from California, we don't need to speculate about what the further consequences of this agenda is going to be, because the sort of policies that are being proposed here by this administration, they've already taken effect in California. And by the way, who was the Secretary of Labor in California for our current governor? It was Julie Su, the current acting Secretary of Labor for this administration. And so the effect of these policies in California is right now we have the second highest unemployment rate in the country. Last year, we had the lowest level of wage growth of any state of the country. We were 50th out of the 50 states, and we have the highest level of rate of real poverty in the country as well. That is not what I want for the rest of the country. And so I would strongly urge the administration to withdraw this rule, to certainly withdraw the nomination of now the longest serving acting secretary in US history, Julie Su, and to take a new approach towards economic stewardship that respects the rule of Congress and respects the rights of workers. Without any further business, this committee stands adjourned.